and I'll screen shared. Okay, well, perfect. Today's webinar is actually a pretty easy one, and basically I'll be reviewing a few tricks. As you're probably aware, no AI is perfect, and we always have to take into account some unknown user input or question that we may not anticipate as part of this process. And so with that, I'm actually going to show you a couple ways on how you can set up Juji to handle those unknown user inputs, and how you can actually set up different ways to deal with that, and also how you can actually get a message when, let's say, a user has a specific kind of question, and we'll review that as we go along. So for today, we're actually going to explore 3 specific ways to handle unknown user input. One of them is the already built-in Juji process. Here, one second. Okay, one is, they already built in. That's that fallback handling, and I'll show you how to do that under the settings area. And of course, the next ones are actually pretty straightforward. One is to create a custom response, and also to handle it within the QA itself. And so you'll see that as we go through, and there's some different ways to handle that through the QA, but also through the main workflow area, and I'll show you that as we go along. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right out of this slideshow and actually just get right into the meat of the system. So, and by the way, since there's not as many folks on today, feel free just to ask questions as they arise. So you can unmute yourself and just jump in and ask whenever they come into play. So first off, I am logged in. I'm going to actually go in and manage my chatbot. And for today, I just set it up pretty simple. And one of the first things here I want to go on is the fallback handling. That's the first thing we want to talk about. So we're going to chatbot settings here. And basically under here, as you scroll down, you'll see where it says response control. And this is how we can set it up to handle unknown user input, like a question that we weren't anticipating. And so with that, there is some basic checkboxes here, and you'll see all the different ways that you can handle all the different unknown input. And let's say, you don't want to enable part of the AI for that. All you have to do is uncheck it. So, if I didn't want the user's questions about chat being there, I could do that. But right now I have it set to handle everything. And some of the things like the gibberish input, that's just like somebody just, doing, I call it the ASDF salute. So they just put in some random letters and hit enter just to see what will happen. And so right there is how you actually set it up to, handle those types of unknown. There's some really easy ones that are already built into there as part of that. So just to show you that, like, let's say I go in here and I ask about the weather, right? I have nothing in my QA or anything in there, but the AI already has it built in to handle the weather question, and it automatically directs them to weather.com. So that's what that fallback handling does, is utilize the AI to kind of build in or have those types of responses. So it's not just sitting there saying, I don't know, this is what you can do. Now, there are those areas where it doesn't know. And in that case, again, I think if you didn't see our earlier webinar, there's some ways to handle that with like the feedback control. And so, so let's say if there is a response that isn't even handled through the fallback handling, you can actually build in here to say, sorry, and it'll just default to that for things that aren't even handled through the fallback handling for those questions outside of the AI even. And so it'll give a defined response. And then from there, I can actually set it up. And right here, you'll see where I have this check mark. I can actually put in there when, let's say it has a question is like, I have nothing, right? I don't know what you're asking. I don't know, the AI doesn't know what you're asking. It'll actually have them, it'll send an email to you of what their question is. And then when you go in and answer the question using the tool, it'll actually respond back to them that you responded. So there's that feedback loop that is created in the process. And so that right there is that whole idea of how Juji handles, the AI handles like, those default questions. So that's all done through this under the settings and the fallback handling. And then of course you can set it up for when it's a question so far out there that even the AI doesn't know. And then you can actually set it up to send you a notification when that happens. Okay. Now let's say, you want to have a answer for the weather question. And so you don't want Juji to handle, you still want the fallback handling in there, but you actually want to specifically address if they ask a question about weather, right? You can go in here and actually answer the question. So let's say you just, if they ask anything about the weather, you're going to say, and so you want to actually, just head that off at the pass. You can build it in to, actually take over the fallback handling and give a response that you wanted. And if you put that into the QA area, there's a already predefined question in there. And so it won't revert back to the fallback handling. And so that's another way that you can deal with, let's say, some of those unknown questions, you can actually build them in if you're seeing them repeated in the process. So then when let's say I go in here and ask, how is the weather? It then will give a response that we define as part of that process instead of going back to that. The other thing you'll notice that, and I actually built this in just to illustrate this, I have built into where I'm asking questions as part of my chat flow, right? And so even though I jumped out and asked a different question than what it was asking for, it still, you'll notice that it still reverted back. Now, again, I define that in the chatbot settings under the fallback handling, that it would actually go back and refer back, it actually goes back to the re-ask, right? And so that is actually set up in these questions here. And so, so even if it won't allow me to skip the script, okay? And so that's actually set up in the fallback handling as well. And so I did want to bring your attention to that because sometimes an errant question can derail the chatbot workflow. And that's one of the ways you can do that. You can still identify the unknown user input, handle it, and then still revert back to the workflow. Okay. Now, let's say in your QA process, they get an unknown, you get an unknown question, and one of the things that like Michelle explained to me on this when I was setting up this webinar is, let's say, you know, you have a chatbot that answers questions for a restaurant, right? And somebody gets on there and asks questions, has any other customers had a sick stomach from last night's food? Have you heard anything? And that may be one of those things you don't want to have a quick answer to, right? You may, you want to handle that to where, you know, like, hey, you know, here's this question, we'll get back to you within 24 hours. And a lot of times that's done when people are asking, you know, can I talk to a human? And so already built into your, like all of the AI and the QAs is this question about somebody wanting to talk to a human. Is anybody available to chat? And you can actually add to that. And, you know, if you recall on some previous webinars, we actually got into the whole multi-turn aspect. And so again, I put in a quick response back, but then I go into my multi-turn. And if you recall, that multi-turn looks like the sideways V, right? And since I've already created it, it's going to allow me just to go in and to edit. And so one of the first things I did is I responded to him, hey, if you want, you know, if you want to talk to a human, first things I need your email address. And so you need, you know, if it's at the beginning of the chat or if during your chat, you know, you already have captured their first name and their email address, that's automatically going to propagate. But this is a way for you to ensure that you're capturing that. And then what I did is I actually built in there. So I did the question, and then I actually used the pre-built chatbot response, right? And I actually just selected it, and it automatically created it so I can ask for the user email, and it'll actually then send me a notification that this user has this question, and it'll include their email to respond back to them. So for instance, on how I did that, let me just go in here. And you'll see it actually, it takes me through that process. It gives me the response. And since I had already, you know, I'm already in the chat, it'll automatically confirm my email. And when I say yes, it's then going to send me a notification that there was this question and that they would like to speak with somebody like a human.
Steve, so, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So I'd already asked Winxie, and they're working on the CC feature so that we know it gets sent back. But when someone asks for the answer and you go in the QA and you update it, is that the only way that it'll get sent? Is if where it says that user question, if you put it in that chat bot response, if you update it in that field, is that the only way that they get the email, or if there's that utterance, it will send it to them? Does that make sense?
Yes. It also depends on how you set up like the feedback handling as well. So let me think here on how best answer that, because if you recall on an earlier webinar, I set it up to deal with like when there's, you know, a question that wasn't answered. And so on your feedback setting, you're also going to set it up to where they are going to, they're you know, on that feedback loop. So if you've set up your original chatbot to actually go in and set up, you know, the feedback loop, not only will they get a response when you answer the question, but also when there's a different way for you to respond also through the feedback loop. Does that make sense?
I think so, but I guess my question is, we had a couple of use cases this week where that happened, and I'm not sure if the prospect or the user actually got the response. And so I don't know how to do that QA part to double check it.
Okay.
And if you want to come back, I don't want to derail this at all, but
let me come back to that, and I'll come back and I'll address that after I'm done with the webinar. So we'll kind of do it offline. Is that okay?
yes, sir.
Okay. So back, let me reverse course back here again. So back to the QA board. And so when on this area, like, so this is one way within this process. If I set this up to where I ask a user contact email, when I respond back, this will actually respond back to them outside that feedback loop. Okay. So not only are they responding back when you answer the question in the QA board, but since I set it up here, it's also going to respond back to them as well. Okay. So this is actually setting up to where, this is like when they ask to chat with a human, and this will respond back to them. Okay. So in that regard, this is going to respond back regardless of whether you answer a question in the QA board. Okay. Now, there's another area here that for the unknown user input as well. And so let's say through the main chat flow, this is the third area here now, by the way. Now, let's say through the main chat flow, you ask a question, right? And so I've asked the question, and I can define whether or not, like, what kind of responses there are. So let's say you ask a question and you want to make sure you don't want to let them off the hook. So a lot of times in a chat, they'll just say, I don't know, right? You actually have the ability to say, I'll accept that I don't know, so you'll let them off the hook, or it'll actually circle back and re-ask the question. Also built in within that control, you can detect, the gibberish. So like if they're just, just typing in whatever, just a bunch of letters to see if they can get by it, it will actually detect that and then re-ask the question again. And so that's a couple of other fail safes on the unknown user input when you're actually asking a specific question within the chat flow. Sometimes they'll just answer a question like, I don't know, or they'll just put in gibberish, and you can actually detect that and, re-ask, and they'll eventually have to either ask the question or end the chat. And so again, you can do that as well. Okay. And so what I mean by that is, so when I start this, I'm asking for the meaning of life, right? And we all know the meaning of life is chocolate, but I'm not going to ask that. So I'm just going to put, I don't know. And since I set it up to where it's not going to accept that, it's going to circle back and ask again. Okay. And so again, you can actually detect, like, the I don't know or the gibberish. And so just to show you what I mean by the gibberish, let me go back to my preview again. And it's funny, I came from a development world, and a lot of times we used to call it the four finger salute. And on your buttons, if you the first four letters are always ADSF, right? And so ADSF is gibberish, and it will detect that and then circle back. Okay, and so there's like three ways to handle that unknown user input. The first one is under the chatbot settings, and you do it through the handling unknown user input. You can create a response back process as well, and you can handle it through the fallback handling. So if they get, if through the fallback handling there's an unknown user input, it'll answer it through the AI, and you can enable that. The second way is defining it in the QA board. So when you get an unknown user input, you can define that in the QA board as well, and then give that answer and then move on. Sometimes in that QA board, they'll actually ask for, is anyone available to chat? Those are all built into the standard QAs. And then through that, you can actually then, again, capture the user email and respond back through that process. And then last but not least, just as far as, let's say, a wrap up, within the main chat flow, if you have a question, if you click, you'll see right here where, you click on this setting right here for the topic, and then you can actually set some additional parameters, like let's say it's required or it's not required. You can look for gibberish, and you can either choose to accept or not accept, like the I don't know response. And so those are like the three separate ways to handle like that unknown user input. Now, what I'm going to do here to see if there's any questions outside of that, now I'm going to go ahead and stop my recording, if that's okay. And then I'm going to address your feedback loop.